Good evening, oh brave ones who have forged through this wonderful pre-summer weather that we have. This is the last program of the 2014-15 Ars New York chapter season, and we have quite a treat in store for us tonight. This is a program entitled When Summer Is Gone, The Life and Legacy of band leader Hal Kemp, presented by David Lewis and Rebecca Forste. Forste, okay. That's why there's an E at the end, right? Okay. Let me just give you a little introduction. Before Benny Goodman's second Palomar broadcast engagement in 1936, which crowned him the quote-unquote king of swing, few would have argued against the popularity and relevance of band leader Hal Kemp, 1904 to 1940. That's it? Who was leading one of the top bands in the nation, starting with a small dance band at the Carolina Club at UNC-Chapel Hill. That sounds familiar. In the early 1920s, Kemp became a dominant force in the early years of swing, noted for his innovations, musical ambition, excellent sidemen, including Bunny Berigan, and first-rate vocalists such as Skinnay Ennis, Bob Allen, Maxine and the Smoothies. With his early death on the eve of World War II, Kemp was forgotten, and in the years since, critics have often miscategorized his music as quote-unquote sweet, or quote-unquote Mickey Mouse, or misrepresented his orchestra as a, quote, funny hat band, unquote. Kemp maintained a varied slate of sophisticated and sweet, introducing several songs now regarded as standards. Their book included some of the most advanced charts of the time by such composers as Reginald Foresythe, Raymond Scott, Sid Phillips, and Kemp himself. This presentation will serve as an overview of Hal Kemp's career, including film clips, recording excerpts, and a demonstration of his invention, the clarinet megaphone. Oh. Now, let us talk about David N. Uncle Dave Lewis. Has been an Ars member since 1999. Poor man, he's passed his 15th anniversary. Yeah. He has presented at several Ars conferences since giving his first talk in Santa Barbara in 2002. That long ago? Wow. On the subject of the obscure bandleader Harry Spindler. Lewis ran the underground record label Hospital Records out of Cincinnati in the 1980s and has had a long presence in public radio, appearing in years-long programs on WAIF in Cincinnati, WCBN in Ann Arbor, Michigan from the university, and he has worked as a classical music buyer for the West Coast Tower Records, oh well, and Virgin Megastores, oh well, locations in the 1990s, and spent a decade as editor for the all-music group now called Rovi Corp. Today he presents monthly lectures at the Public Library of Cincinnati and Hamilton County on topics relating to the music and recording industry in the Ohio Valley, and is an historian and producer for WVXU, the NPR affiliate in Cincinnati. His radio piece on bandleader Earl Fuller won him an Excellence in Journalism Award from the Society for Professional Journalists. Rebecca Forste, a new member to Ars, and recently made her debut as a reviewer for the Ars Journal. However, she is no stranger to journalism, having worked as a contributor and editor for a variety of publications. Her background and interest in sound recordings is largely the legacy of her late mother, who is an audiophile and long-standing collector. Ladies and gentlemen, may I introduce Dave and Rebecca? And I know you're going to really enjoy it because we did when we saw it at Ars last year, and that's why we asked them to come. Dave, it's all yours.
Track one, please.
The sensational new oatmeal skin treatment that softens, whitens, and protects the complexion brings you Hal Kemp and his international favorites.
I'd like to thank researcher Rebecca Forste, who collaborated with me on this project, Dennis Rooney, who would normally be here but isn't tonight, Rich Canady, David Lennick, Vince Giordano, Dan Levinson, Bob Conrad, Ra Hoffman, Frank Donovan, Vincent Pilote, Elizabeth Searles, and James Hirshhorn of the Rutgers Institute of Jazz Studies, and Hal Kemp's daughter, Sally Kemp. And I'd also like to thank these guys here too, Seth and Gary. Two quick things. I'm really, really honored to be speaking in this room. When I was in my 20s, I was an avid reader of a column called Coffee, Brandy, and Cigars XXX by a fellow named Herman G. Weinberg, who was a film professor here. And I'm glad to be standing in one of the spots that he may have occupied at one time. And secondly, if I were not here with you fine folks tonight, I'd be in Cincinnati picking up the award that I won from the Society of Professional Journalists for a more recent piece that I did on Bob Roberts for WVXU. So, next slide, please. There was once a prevailing notion among jazz scholars before my time that Hal Kemp was the leader of a sweet, funny hat band, a one-hit wonder whom at best was justly forgotten and at worst equanimous, let me say that word again, equanimitous to the Mickey Mouse confections of Tommy Tucker and Blue Baron. However, I would be glad to speak on Kemp under any circumstances, as I have a real passion for his music and his legacy. I hope that in the next hour or so I can convince you that there's a lot more to Hal Kemp than the prevailing notion, and that my passion, which is shared, is justifiable. Hal Kemp was born in Marion, Alabama on March 27, 1904. His father was a civil engineer with the railroad. When he was young, his family moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, where he attended Alexander Graham Bell High School. Alexander Graham High School, no Bell. At this time, Kemp was already active as a musician. In his high school yearbook, one of his fellow students commends Kemp on his ability to lead a band. Next slide, please. In 1922, Kemp enrolled in the University of North Carolina and became active in just about all the student music organizations there, except for the Mandolin Club, including this Brown Brothers styled saxophone quartet seen here. Next slide, please. He also founded in 1922 the Carolina Club Orchestra, the first hot dance band on campus. Word of their excellence reached bandleader and talent scout Paul Specht in New York, who sent the band out on a cruise ship to London during their summer vacation in 1924. While in London, the Carolina Club Band made its first recordings for English Columbia. Next slide, next audio. That was Charleston Cabin. And incidentally, Joe, I wanted to mention, I brought with me a English Columbia of Hal Kemp that has Ted Lewis on the other side. Charleston Cabin is only their second recording, and right away you can hear Kemp's preference for quirky harmonic combinations. a hallmark of his style that would last his whole career. Among the extensive Hal Kemp collections held at the University of North Carolina, or UNC, there is a group of letters home from Kemp on this voyage where he states that his music was so cutting edge that the British band on board were getting less applause than the Carolina Club boys. Well, their arrangements were kept in a big steamer trunk, and the British musicians expressed their appreciation for the young Kemp band by hauling the trunk out to the deck and heaving it over the side. However, one very important passenger who did not take umbrage was the Prince of Wales, Edward VIII, who was a confirmed jazz fan. He fancied the Carolina Club Orchestra both on the trip over and coincidentally on the way back, where the band allowed him to sit in on the drums and whack away at them while they played. News of this, however, reached the tabloids back in England and stirred up some measure of outrage, causing embarrassment to the royal family. Therefore, as a result of this incident, restrictions were levied on American dance bands traveling to England, and these remained in place until about 1932. When Duke Ellington was allowed to come over. Next slide. Their summer vacation over, the Carolina Club Orchestra returned to Chapel Hill for the start of the next semester. But they had managed to connect with Pathé Records in New York City, and in the months to follow, the Carolina Club made trips north on holidays and in breaks to make records for Pathé. One of these, Who Takes Care of the Caretaker's Daughter, was Kemp's first hit, issued on no less than 8 different releases and appearing as far away as Poland. Listening to a bit of it, it is not hard to imagine why this hot record was popular. Next slide, next audio. This is Kemp. Sometime late in the school year, the Carolina Club band broke up, and the band's pianist, Slats Randall, assumed leadership of the Carolina Club Orchestra at home. He would later record with this new band for OK, I guess it is. To all appearances, Hal Kemp returned to full-time studies at UNC, but behind the scenes, he was building another band. Next slide, please. Some of the UNC musicians in this new group would form the core of the orchestra Kemp would lead for the next 15 years. Reed man Ben Williams was the only member retained from the earlier band, and he would still be with Kemp at the end. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to try to point them out. Saxy Dowell, down here in the corner, is another Reed man who would remain with Kemp until 1939. He also sang and wrote several of the band's novelty-oriented hits. Skinnay Ennis, the drummer, who is second from left, he was later would become Kemp's main vocalist and a star in his own right. To the right of Skinnay is pianist and arranger John Scott Trotter, who helped to give the Kemp Band its unique sound. On April the 20th, 1926, this new Hal Kemp Orchestra recorded for the first time for a mobile Columbia unit in Atlanta. And one of the resulting sides, Blue Rhythm, is based on the New Orleans Rhythm Kings standard Farewell Blues, and is to my ear simply one of the most amazing records made by a white territory band in the 1920s. Next slide, next audio. It's a well-drilled clarinet section. I guess I can't resist mentioning the whole passage stated in whole tone in that recording, and the lovely Louis Armstrong influenced solo floating over the clarinet trio towards the end of the sample. Great work, fellas. Next slide, please. From contemporary news articles and local UNC publications, it is clear that the school is proud of both Carolina Club orchestras in spreading the fame of the university throughout the world, which it literally was. This UNC yearbook states, Hal Kemp is one of the leaders on the campus, of the campus. He has rendered great service to the university through his excellent aid in fostering the musical life of the student body. Nevertheless, Kemp felt that his future was not in Chapel Hill, but in New York. And by February 1927, he was working there full-time and recording for Brunswick. It is a little unclear as to whether Kemp ultimately took his degree. This yearbook page suggests that he did, but the UNC finder for the Kemp collection states that he did not. Next slide. The band recorded as Hal Kemp and his orchestra for Brunswick and as the Carolina Club Orchestra for Columbia's subsidiary, OK. They also appeared in an early musical short for Paramount backing banjoist Eddie Peabody in late 1928 or early 1929. While Peabody is the star of this short, for the first minute or so, some of which is behind the front title, we can experience a visual record of the hot Hal Kemp band of the 20s playing I Don't Care, which was written for them by Saxy Dow. The collegiate antics captured in this film, and by the way, do you know where that is, the Hotel Manger in New York City? Ever hear of it?
Mangy, but not mangy. I know where 751st is.
All right, just curious. The collegiate antics captured in this film were a standard element in the early band's performances. And this has led to the notion that Kemp had what is called, in not very complimentary terms, a funny hat band. It is true that after Kemp relocated to New York, that he woodshedded with Fred and Tom Waring's band, the Pennsylvanians. And then they were the most popular dance band in the country. And that Waring would offer the always struggling Kemp band financial support when it looked like the end was near, which came several times. Next frame. Kemp paid this forward by offering to help another Carolina club band leader, Kay Kaiser, when he was in need during the mid-1930s. Next slide, please. But the idea of a funny hat band, which is what Bosie White told me they were back in the 1990s, suggests that they were by 1929 a comedy act, unable or unwilling to play real jazz. In my view, the records tell a different story. Kemp's Octave version.
I found Hotel Manger.
Oh, yeah?
Was sold in 1931 and reopened as the Hotel Taft. The Taft catered to a Broadway tourist crowd, fell on hard times in the 70s, shut down in 1985. It's now the Michelangelo Hotel.
So it's still...
Next to the Roxy Theater
Uh-huh.
on 51st.
First between 6th and 7th.
Right next to Roxy, you said?
Yeah,
On 7.
on 7th.
We're going to have to check that out, I think.
Okay, well,
That's a still standing hotel where their Hal Kemp band played.
yeah, there's apparently some suicide in there at one time.
Ooh.
That's what it says. 1927. A woman came to the hotel. She was assigned to room 1239. About 10 o'clock, guests on the second floor heard a thud. And the woman's body was seen on the top of an extension that runs over the main entrance to the hotel. There's even a picture of it on a postcard.
Yeah.
It's there. It's amazing what you can find on the internet in 2 seconds. Ain't life grand.
Well, in my view, the records tell a different story from Bosie's story. Kemp's okay version of Walking with Susie shows that he was listening to Frank Trumbauer's records for the same label, and therefore they got the memo on swing very early. Although he would later do a humiliating funny drunk routine with the band and wrote some of the silliest novelty songs of the 1930s, Saxy Dowell was then pioneering a type of jazz singing with Kemp, a relaxed and swinging, if formative, approach. Next slide, please, and next audio.
I'm woozy when Susie's holding my arm. My heart is bumping and it's thumping when I'm walking with Susie. I hit the ceiling, what a feeling when I'm walking with Susie. Although I'm Tuesday, Susie will do. I'm feeling sappy, I'm so happy when I'm walking with Susie.
Next slide, please. Brunswick can't have liked that Kemp's Carolina Club releases for OK outsold their Hal Kemp credited discs. But in the wake of Black Tuesday, Columbia dumped a slew of contracts, including Kemp's, and the band subsequently recorded exclusively for Brunswick. Next slide, please. I'm sure that current day Columbia would have liked to have had that decision back, as shortly afterward Bunny Berigan joined the band. Next slide, please. Both Berigan and trumpeter Jack Purvis were active in the Kemp band in the years 1929 through 1931, and the resulting discs are the most sought after and hotly debated of all Hal Kemp records among jazz collectors. This is further complicated in that Mickey Bloom, a third hot trumpet, now better known as a songwriter, was also active in the band at the time, though he is not so identified in Rust, and he was almost as good as the other two. So, this is a page taken from Rutgers' copy of Brian Rust's American Dance Band discography, and you can't read it, but up in the corner, there's an annotation in the hand of Dan Morgenstern, which reads, "Very poor personnel research." And it's underlined, okay? However, indeed, we've had these books to work with some 50 years. Brian Rust is the father of our discipline as discographers. He's gone on to his earthly reward. So I think I can say now that his Hal Kemp discography is one of his worst. However, at least 4 selections recorded in 1930 are unquestionably the work of Bunny Berigan, and they were his first recordings as well. We will hear his solo from Washing the Blues from My Soul, from a Brunswick session made May 14th, 1930. I need the next image and next audio.
Trudging along, eyes up to heaven, heart full of song. Oh, Lordy, can't you see, I'm washing the blues from my soul. I hit all the high spots and found they were vain. To lose that false pleasure was really to gain. Oh, Lordy, can't you see, I'm washing the blues from my soul. I lifted my hopes to the highest and found a world friendly and true. Now, right where you are, you can find it. You only need the right kind of view. I put off the old ways and took on the new. The clouds are divided, the sun shining through. Oh, Lordy, can't you see? I'm washing the blues from my soul.
I have included Skinnay Ennis's vocal as it represents another innovation from the Hal Kemp Band. Ennis sings on Kemp records starting in 1928, but on OK and their few Plaza Music recordings, the record company substituted formal singers such as Irving Kaufman, Arthur Fields, and Scrappy Lambert to cover the vocal choruses. Although we usually think of Louis Armstrong and Bing Crosby as spearheading the move towards a more intimate and relaxed style of singing, Ennis was their exact contemporary and sang in a way previously unheard, breathy, unhurried, and charming. While Ennis's singing was recognized in its time as unique, its impact on other singers is something we'll have to reserve for another study. Next slide, please. Depression economics forced the Brunswick Record Company onto the Receivers Index at the end of 1930, and the company was acquired by Warner Brothers, who started to reject most of the discs that the Kemp Band made for them. In 1931, with Berigan in tow, the band started a long homestand at the Café de Paris in France and did very well, although Berigan's legendary unreliability began to surface at this time, and he left when they returned to the States. The America they returned to was in the grips of the Great Depression, and clearly the happy, silly collegiate jazz that they specialized in was now out of step with the times. Moreover, Kemp's time in France exposed him to French Impressionism. He met composer Maurice Ravel and received from him a copyist manuscript of Bolero, which he then adapted into a dance arrangement with the approval of the composer. Kemp did not record it until 1933, but it became an immediate and permanent feature in his programs. Next slide, and audio. And it's scarce as hell. I looked forever to find that record. John Scott Trotter re-recorded that chart in the 60s. And that was like my default version for a long time. But yeah, the original is really hard to come by. All right, next slide, please. Those are in the wrong order. Try the one after. Nope. Okay, I'm missing one. We can go back to this one. In a 1939 article written for Metronome, which was what was in the slide, Yeah, it's not there. It's gone. Yeah. That Kemp discusses the impact French Impressionism has made upon him and other leaders of his day. And this is a quote. A leader of a dance band writing about symphony and the classics is somewhat akin to a glass-jawed second-rater going up against Joe Louis. But it's because of my keen interest in the classics and their influence on modern music that I am taking up a challenge to give forth here with my observations. The average dial twister listening to our brand of Dancipation, that's D-A-N-S-A-P-A-T-I-O-N, would hardly suspect that behind our staccato rhythms is a solid base of serious music and the classics. The modern composer and arranger, because of a continued study of the classics and the new effects now open to him, is able to achieve a new richness and color in the symphonic presentation of popular music. The modern composer in the popular field can add dozens of rich tonal effects which musicians a few decades ago never dreamed of. So next time you hear one of your pseudo-critics lambast the long hairs and the symphony, let him rave. Long after he's gone, Wagner, Debussy, and Ravel will be teaching arrangers and popular musicians, and of both sweet and swing variety. Okay, we back to the Black Hawk postcard. Kemp's major, this by the way is at Rutgers. James Hirschhorn found it. It's an actual postcard. It reproduced beautifully. Kemp's major discovery, however, upon returning to American soil was the potential of radio. Through the power of that medium, the Kemp Band first came into national prominence. Kemp managed to get a booking with the Black Hawk restaurant in Chicago, where his band would be situated for the better part of the next 3 years. The Black Hawk was already wired for radio, and the Kemp Band began to do up to 3 radio broadcasts a day, some of which went out nationally and made the band's fame. Thanks to collector and scholar Rich Canady, we can actually hear the dawn of Hal Kemp's involvement with radio through a broadcast on the Lucky Strike program dated November 1, 1932, and captured on an RCA home recording disc. Yeah.
But meanwhile in Chicago, there's a young man waiting to play for you, Hal Kemp and his boys from the Black Hawk Restaurant. He's a young gentleman from the South, and he's knee-deep in a bunch of collegians from North Carolina. Every Saturday night, America learns just how good Southern football can be, and tonight you can learn what kind of music is a hit below the Mason-Dixon line and all over the USA. So on with the dance, Hal Kemp. Okay, Chicago.
A little earlier in September, Kemp had managed to regain his recording contract with ARC, the successor to Brunswick. Although ARC maintained an impressive talent roster that they inherited from other labels, they were a small and weak label themselves that managed to buy up the assets of bigger fish when they went belly up on the surface of the pond. While Kemp was in Europe, ARC issued some records by an anonymous studio orchestra under the Carolina Club Orchestra name, something that could hardly have escaped Kemp's attention, and perhaps he used that as leverage to get his recording activity back on track. Most of Hal Kemp's studio recordings were made for ARC. By the way, there are about 320 Kemp studio recordings, issued ones, and several more that are unreleased, that survive. His association with ARC lasted nearly 5 years and resulted in several of the band's greatest recordings. What Kemp and his arranger John Scott Trotter devised in the meantime was a softer focus approach, equally derived from Duke Ellington and French Impressionism, and based around distinctive effects. These included so-called tuckas in the trumpets. That was their name. They were short staccato notes in a stuttering but coordinated pattern, and 3 octaves apart piano solos, which Trotter claimed to have developed himself, though I've observed it in earlier records by Eddie Duchin. And I kind of think that that's where Trotter got the idea. And so next slide and next audio. Next slide, please. In the case of the clarinet megaphone, Kemp used simple technology to make a significant change to the sound of his band. Having a preference for clarinet passages in the Chalumeau register, I think it's Chalumeau, it's hard for me to say, he noted that in this low range, the clarinet did not project well. So, I haven't confirmed whether he actually invented the device, but Kemp was the main band leader to use them. Megaphone-like cones equipped with 2 holes so that you could insert a clarinet into it and amplify it. Get 3 of these amplified clarinets together, and it resulted in a buzzy, woody sound that was mysterious and sexy. And we did shoot some video of Dan Levinson playing one of these devices with the Nighthawks. They have them. They've rebuilt them. Unfortunately, we weren't able to rebuild our video, which went into a directory from which it disappeared forever. However, we can listen to this fabulous recording of Hal Kemp's from 1939, his record of Love for Sale. The opening chorus combined all 3 effects, the tuckas, the 3 octaves apart piano, and the clarinet megaphones. Next slide, next audio. Next slide, please. Thank you. Kemp's special effects were mined relentlessly by sweet bands, and this has led to the general conclusion that Hal Kemp also led a sweet band. A charge most of us who care about Kemp would steadfastly deny. Unlike the ticky-tock rhythms, special effects, and silly sung announcements akin to such bands as Tommy Tucker, Blue Baron, or Sammy Kaye, Kemp's band had a seriousness of purpose, good singers, and was most popular with educated audiences. By the late 1930s, their core audience was found on college campuses, and contemporary articles note that Kemp's fans tended to listen as much as they might dance. In his time, Kemp was recognized as one of the pioneers of swing and among the top band leaders in the nation. Kemp was also noticed for his tendency to balance popular material with edgy pieces more forward in fashion than any sweet band leader would dare touch. Among the composers that he featured frequently in his book were Reginald Foresythe, Raymond Scott, Sid Phillips, Morton Gould, and Kemp himself. Unfortunately, the record companies that he worked for were seldom as interested in such material as he was, and very little of it is to be found among his commercial recordings, though a bit more can be culled from radio broadcasts. The original version of the following montage was a bit longer and had a little more in it. I'll put it on my personal box if anyone would want to hear it, but in the interest of time, the next segment will contain just 2 pieces, visual and audio. And you've got that.
title of the next number, Off the Beat, is a little confusing. I wish you'd explain it.
Well, I'm not sure I can, Carlton. It's just a little idea of mine that I worked out trying to find something new in a musical rhythm. There have been foxtrots, one-steps, and waltzes, but I don't think a dance band has ever tried 5/4 time.
Well, it sounds a little complicated, but interesting, Hal. Maybe a new dance will come out of it called the five-step.
Well, I sure hope so.
Well, lift that baton, maestro, and let's hear Off the Beat.
I don't think that the dancers ever got around to making the five-step happen, but... All right, next slide, please. And I should say with the subsequent slides, they change with each segment. Kemp was particularly lucky in terms of engaging singers. Initially, he was hoping to provide a little breathing room for Skinnay Ennis, who by 1933 was doing all of the singing save novelty numbers that Saxy Dowell took on. In 1934, Hal Kemp added Bob Allen, who was just about a good boy singer as you would want to have, clean-cut, handsome, and clear-voiced with excellent pronunciation and a personable style. Dean Janis was Kemp's first girl, but within a year she was replaced by the splendid Maxine Gray, who became a mainstay in the band for several years. Here now is a montage of the Kemp vocalists. Next slide, next audio. Oh, you got it.
Slumberless, dearest, the shadows I live with are numberless. Little white flowers will never awaken you, not where the black coast of sorrow has taken you. Angels have no thought of ever returning you. Would they be angry if I thought of joining you? Gloomy Sunday.
I walk along the street of sorrow, the boulevard of broken dreams, where gigolo and gigolette can take a kiss without regret, so they forget their broken dreams. You laugh tonight and cry tomorrow when you behold your shattered scheme. And gigolo and gigolette wake up to find their eyes are wet with tears that tell of broken dreams.
There's a small hotel with a wishing well. I wish that we were there together. There's no bridal suite, one room bright and neat, complete for us to share together. Looking through the window, you can see a distant steeple, not a sign of people who want people. When the steeple bell says good night, sleep well, the small hotel together.
Got to date with an angel, got to meet her at 7. Got a date with an angel, now I'm on my way to heaven. She's so lovely beside me, and whatever betide me, got an angel to guide me, so I'm on my way to heaven. Soon I'll hear the bells ring out, and the choir will sing out, when the pearly gates swing out, or she'll beckon to me. Now I've been waiting a lifetime for this evening at 7. Got a date with an angel, now I'm on my way to heaven.
Of course, that montage ends with the band's biggest hit, Got a Date with an Angel, the only Hal Kemp song to survive into the current day repertoire. It became a hit twice, through its 1934 ARC recording, and then again when it was re-recorded for RCA Victor in 1937. This 1935 article, and that's right, identifies Kemp as the winner of a dancer's poll of the top band leaders in the nation. He's number 1, nosing out Guy Lombardo and leaving Eddie Duchin in the dust. Next, yes, thank you. In 1936, Kemp fired John Scott Trotter, who went on to join Bing Crosby, where he worked as Bing's chief arranger for the better part of the next 30 years. He took on a proper arranging staff consisting of Hal Mooney, Ralph Hallenbeck, and Lou Bush, who might be known to some of you as Joe Fingers Carr, and also expanded the size of his band. In its last years, the Kemp Orchestra boasted such talents as trumpeters Randy Brooks, Charlie Margulies, and Chris Griffin, along with guitarist Dave Barber. New singers introduced in the late 30s included Nan Wynn, one of my favorites, Janet Blair, Judy Starr, and pioneer close harmony group the Smoothies. In 1937, Hal Mooney contributed Swamp Fire to Hal Kemp's book, but ARC refused to record him in it, giving it instead to Ozzie Nelson and later to Andre Kostelanetz, who had a hit with it. This was the last straw for Kemp, who found a happy new home at RCA Victor in mid-1937. But then gradually the wheels began to come off the train. Next slide. While the year 1937 ended with the band's popularity at its peak, 1938 was anything but friendly to them. Right after Christmas, Skinnay Ennis served notice, which meant that the Kemp band could no longer perform their biggest hit, Got a Date with an Angel, which Ennis planned to use as his own new band's theme. On February the 11th, the movie they'd made for RKO, the not-so-fondly remembered Radio City Rebels, opened to empty theaters nationwide and swiftly lost $300,000. RKO went out of its way to do what they thought might fix the picture, covering Kemp's music up with that of a studio orchestra and reshooting some numbers. Though he continued to appear in musical shorts, Radio City Rebels constituted the Kemp band's only appearance in a feature. Next slide, please. Just 11 days later, the Kemp band was returning to Chicago from Hollywood when a truck slammed into the train they were traveling in just outside of Chicago, derailing the band car. Singer Maxine Gray was thrown the whole length of the car and landed with a broken back and a concussion that rendered her unconscious for 3 days. According to Gray, after she recovered, Kemp fired her, but she did rejoin the band later. This may seem uncharacteristic for the perpetually cheery Kemp, but he was going through some measure of his his own personal hell at the time. He was in the midst of a messy divorce from his first wife. The result of it was that he never again saw his two young children, Sally and Hal Jr., though he remarried right away to his second wife, Martha, who gave birth to one more child, Helen Stevenson Kemp. And as this talk is presented, all of the Kemp children are still living today. There began to become a problem with hits. Saxy Doll penned a novelty tune called "The Love Bug Will Get You If You Don't Watch Out," and which proved popular on Kemp's radio broadcast, but his recording of it went nowhere. Its momentum was sapped by a competing version made by Guy Lombardo. Doll tried again with the Three Little Fishies in the Itty Bitty Pooh. Remember that one? It was recorded in a fun and fetching version by the Smoothies with Kemp. Just as it began to gain ground, Kemp's old buddy Kay Kaiser recorded it in a far sillier version, which became one of Kaiser's personal best punch a hole in the sky kind of hits. Okay. While the Smoothies eventually did bring home the bacon with their cool version of Love for Sale, and Janet Blair scored with a record, The Breeze and I, which was the English language version of a song by Ernesto Lecuona. These were just two among dozens of Kemp Victor recordings that just didn't catch on. He was still a popular live attraction, but by 1940 he was really feeling the pressure of competition. Kemp had two options: either to battle his way back into the fray or to diversify. To the latter end, Kemp accepted in 1939 an invitation to conduct the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, and in the spring of 1941 he was slated to appear with the Boston Symphony Orchestra in Ravel's Bolero, an invitation proffered from none other than Serge Koussevitzky himself. Next slide. But Hal Kemp was never able to make the date. Right after shooting a Vitaphone short in Hollywood on December 18, 1940, the Kemp band was traveling by auto caravan from Los Angeles to a date at the Mark Hopkins Hotel in San Francisco. Outside Madeira, California, Kemp's car was hit head-on by another driver who kept going. Martha Kemp was very badly hurt, and even though Kemp had a broken leg, he still helped get her out of the damaged vehicle, and they were both taken to the hospital. Soon it was discovered that Kemp had two broken ribs which punctured his lung, and he developed pneumonia. Hal Kemp hung on for 3 days, but died on December 21st, 1940, at age 36. The band opened at the St. Hopkins without a leader, the first true ghost band in history. In subsequent months, Skinnay Ennis and John Scott Trotter would tag team covering the band's various dates, but in April 1941, actor and musician Art Jarrett took over the band and led it to the end of its calendar later in the year. Next slide, please. As to what his recorded legacy means, there are numerous stumbling blocks to be encountered in regard to his appreciation. Kemp did record jazz, but why would you want to listen to it when you have Duke Ellington and Jimmy Lunsford in the same period? He might benefit from the artificial construct of the Great American Songbook, as he recorded many of those songs, in some cases for the first time. But many great American songbook fancier I know of are somewhat allergic to vintage recordings of that repertoire. For the sake of Kemp and others in the period, I think that we need to drop the discussion as to whether something is hot or sweet, and to develop a separate strain of appreciation for the popular music of the 1930s as it was, on its own terms. It's not like the difference between Jimmy Lunsford and Hal Kemp is akin to that between Jimi Hendrix and the 1910 Fruit Gum Company. Such division is far narrower, with bands canonized as jazz recording sweet or semi-sweet material and vice versa. Next slide. I do not have time to address Kemp in the reissue market in detail, other than to say it has been spotty at best, and mostly consists of Got a Date with an Angel, reissued again and again on compilations intended for the nostalgia market. Although both RCA and Columbia marketed memorial albums for Kemp just 2 months after he died, subsequently, RCA Victor tried without much success to market a few Kemp releases in the LP era. ARC's successor, Columbia, and later Sony, offered nothing at all until 1990, when a budget reissue appeared in the series Best of the Big Bands with liner notes written by Will Friedwald. In the meantime, gray marketers, European labels, and pirates have been able to drive a truck through the hole that the majors have left behind. We can do better than that. The music is still excellent, and while the nostalgia market is gone and Kemp is forgotten, the right reissue can always open doors in terms of returning a lost artist to appropriate prominence. And as all but Kemp's earliest recordings are currently under the same legal roof by chance, so to speak, perhaps the time is nigh. Thank you very much.
Dave, that was terrific. Don't disappear.
Oh, I haven't.
Now we have questions from the audience. Come on, folks, don't be bashful. You're the experts out there.
What was his instrument? Is that?
You know, his main instrument was really the clarinet, but he played all the reeds like a true 1920s reed man. He played, all the saxes, clarinet, bass clarinet, and in the 1920s kept one of those funny trees next to his stand which would have all the stuff on it. As years moved on, though, he mainly moved between the alto and clarinet. And he, in some of his short films, he plays solos. Any other questions?
This is a purely technical question, but one of the discs you played was an RCA home recording. I wonder if you could tell me who transferred it and what size stylus did they use?
Well, it's someone you know. It's Rich Canati, who does the... Conady. Yeah, I can't say these names right. Rich Conady. And he does the big broadcast series on Rivermont.
Because it was an amazingly good sounding transfer, because you probably know those recordings are almost not there.
Yeah.
To get anything off of them is
Well, they're variable. Someone once sent me something from the 1933 Chicago World's Fair, Record Your Own Voice, and they were on 8-inch Victor discs. And from what the person told me, their mother who went to record it said that in the booth they had an RCA engineer working there. And the disc played back with a narrower stylus than I thought it would. In other words, they did some sort of depth adjustment so that they knew when people got it home it would sound like something. So who knows how the embosser was set?
Exactly.
It's going into those grooves.
Yeah.
The only question I have about it is, did you check the pitch on that? To me, the voice sounded a little fast.
I'll ask him. I didn't actually do it.
Yeah.
He did it and released it on one of his CDs, and that's how I found it.
Yeah.
And actually, no, I didn't. Rebecca found it, and then she actually wrote him, and asked him, can we use this?
Yeah.
But he didn't mention what type of stylus he used when they were done.
Who knows with those? It could go anywhere. It all depends on the machines.
They're not home recordings. They're on the home recording disc system.
Right.
But those were professionally made. Rich has about 300 of those broadcasts from that series for the period of 32 and 33.
Yeah, I remember something, what was it, the history detectives came to my studio, and they brought some of these quote-unquote home recordings. They were of, was when the FBI allowed to have programs done on the air, so they had them recorded. And you would definitely tell they were line checks. In other words, they were not off an AM tuner. They had too much clarity to them.
Yeah.
And they set them up, they had apparently 2 of them with a key switch, so that there was like either an overlap or instantaneous to, to get the entire program. So that was like the earliest way of trying to record something outside of doing it on, cut aluminums. So.
Yes.
It seems he was still popular in 1940.
Yeah. I mean, he was encountering turbulence from, guys like Glenn Miller. They were big. But he was still hanging in there. He was still scoring a few hits. And some of these songs, like Playmates, we had the music for it up earlier. Da 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 da. It's a Saxy Dow composition. You think it's like a child's tune, but it isn't. I first heard that with my grandmother singing it to me, and that's how a fair number of these songs have made it down. It's just we don't necessarily know where they came from.
In fact, the Raymond Scott, what's that piece?
Powerhouse.
Doesn't that predate the use of it in the Warner Brothers cartoon?
Yes, it doesn't start showing up in Warner Brothers cartoons until after Warner Brothers Music bought that part of Raymond's catalog. And for that reason, Carl Stalling had free use of it. And in fact, Raymond didn't even know that use was made for a long, long time.
He just kept getting these checks and wondering, why am I getting these checks?
No, he didn't get the checks either. That was resolved in the courts. But yeah, finally, at one point, Irwin Chuse had published a list of the Raymond Scott titles that were, used in cartoons. And I had a friend who had collected a lot of those cartoons off television, and I made Raymond a VHS tape of those uses. And Mitzi popped it in, showed it to him, and he was like saying, "That's mine!"
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Chuck Haddix did a presentation when we were at UMKC, remember 20 years ago? And he played part of them, showing that the powerhouse being used in those films. Yeah, because they had just inherited a good chunk of Raymond's collection. They had gone out to California to get it.
I packed it up.
Oh,
I was on the staff that packed it up.
Apparently, unfortunately, Raymond was like in the throes of a very bad dementia senility at that point. Essentially, he'd come out and say hello and then go back into the room and watch television.
Yeah, by the time we packed it up, he had died. But in those last years, he was.
That's 20 years ago.
It was very, very hard to communicate with him directly.
Yeah, and another part of it wound up where I am, at the Rodgers and Hammerstein Archives. Of course, there's a certain engineer I don't want to mention who kind of borrowed the stuff from Raymond permanently and then had to do something with it, so it wound up coming to R&H. And we've got the other half, an awful lot of live material, a lot of the early discs, and some of the wartime material, the broadcasts and experiments that he did. And the other half is at UMKC.
Is there a finder for that?
I think so. I think so by now. There should be something.
Because one study I've wanted to do is there's also a gathering of Raymond Scott items in the Morton Gould collection, because Morton was playing a lot of Raymond's pieces on his show.
Yeah.
And I've always wanted to do a study where we could compare those versions.
And where did Morty's collection go?
It's at the Library of Congress.
Okay.
So.
Wasn't Mark Warner
Yes, his older brother. Older by quite a bit, by 11 years. And Powerhouse wasn't the only Raymond Scott piece that Hal Kemp did. He also did in an 18th century drawing room and made a commercial record of it. And there are several other pieces. Well, there's a commercial record also of his version of Siberian Sleigh Ride, which is kind of an oddity, but a real nice piece. And the Kemp version is real good. And then there's several other things that survive on air checks. So, like, and as I say, and another band leader who did record Kemp pretty extensively was the English band leader, not Kemp, but Raymond Scott pretty extensively was Ambrose in England.
Thought you were going to say Jack Hilton.
Yeah.
Who was doing everything.
On the first record that you played, the English Columbia disc, I heard, what was the name of that?
That was Charleston Cabin, and in fact, that does bring up this.
I heard St. James Infirmary.
They break, yeah, and that's actually, I think, in the sheet music of Charleston Cabin. The fact that when it goes into the minor, it's for some reason St. James Infirmary. But this is actually Kemp's first issued record. I'll hold it up for Mike's benefit on English Columbia.
You won't get a DVD of that.
Yeah. Red Hot Mama, backed with Ted Lewis performing June Night. And Kemp also recorded June Night for English Columbia, and I don't think that was released. It had a catalog number, but I think that they thought Ted's was better. Thanks, everyone, for coming.
Don't no one move. Don't no one move. Thank you, Dave. That was terrific. I'm so glad that you were able to do it here in an extended version as opposed to what we do at the conference where it becomes a little Querschnitz, as they say.
Yeah.
Just to let you all know, this is the end of the season. Our next program will be on September 21st, and it will be Earl Wild at 100 with Joe Patridge and John Samuels. And if you were here for the one they did on George Bollett, I know you won't be disappointed. They will always have some unusual live unpublished material showing Mr. Wilde at his best. I want to thank you all, as always. We have to thank the Sonic Arts Center at CCNY for hosting us all the time. And as we always say, all our New York chapter meetings are free and open to the public. Voluntary contributions to help defray our expenses are always welcome. And to join ours, you just go to the website http://www.arsk-audio.org, and you can find out about everything in our organization as well as postings on the last conference. And we also have a listing there of what we're going to be doing for the next season that will be put up fairly soon. I want to wish you all a good summer, and thank you, Dave. You made it short and sweet and painless, which is terrific. And we have to have you come back again. You got to do another one of your specialties.
I'd love to do it.
Okay, thank you again, Dave.